GU Vacardia is Misha Grace Toland, Stuart Tashihil Duca Sharon. Agus son Erin an Tashke be William Falchamore, a her of Ahandanya Italian sa Chahanu, Agus Ahandanya Italian YouTube, Hart Fundon. Shaw la Inta Specialte don Tashke, a Kelluhu Kjol Traditionte na Heron in London. Nadini of Ig Shanama sa Canu and Hjol, Agus gomór war in you an sar ober janta ag Reg Hall con an Hjol Shanawali, Agus Shalu Gavayakan sa sra Voice of the People o topic. So hello everyone, my name is Grace Toland, Director of the Irish Traditional Music Archive, and on behalf of the staff of ETMA, I'd like to welcome you all to Dublin, to the people who have a seat in the house and to everybody who's joining us around the world on YouTube. It's a really special day for ETMA as we host this celebration of Irish music in London. We celebrate the musicians and the singers, and especially today the Trojan work of Reg Hall in documenting their music and their lives. And of course, it's the Irish launch of Topic's Voice of the People series dedicated to Irish music in London. Our celebrations will continue this evening at the Cobblestone with a special concert of music featuring Reg, the McCarthy family, and T.G. Cahir's Young Musician of the Year, Orla McAuliffe. And I'm sure a few others will be joining in as the night goes on. So for now, I'd like to just ask you to make sure your phones are turned off. And I'm going to hand you over to my colleague, Nicholas Carolan, who's going to direct proceedings. And Nicholas, if you would just like to take over. Thank you.
I'll just rearrange myself here. I think I'll have to sit down to stand up to the challenges of this launch. How does that work? Piers, all right? All can hear me, yes. Well, I'll be opening the proceedings from now on, but really most of the talking today will be done by Reg Hall. And my function here is to launch some items that have been produced by Reg. And it gives me a great personal pleasure to do so, and to be part of this Irish launch of the latest of his important publications in Irish traditional music. Reg and I have been friends and colleagues for a long time now, and I've been learning from him since the 1960s, long before I ever actually met him in the flesh. And this event is more than just a launch, it's also a celebration of and a salute to his many and varied contributions to the music over the years and to the quality of his achievements in it. Since the 1950s, with great energy and unflagging commitment, Reg has been regularly playing Irish traditional music. He has been enabling and encouraging others to do the same. As a one-man archive, he has been collecting and preserving the materials of Irish traditional music and information on Irish traditional music and its musicians. He has been editing and publishing sound recordings. He's been writing sleeve notes, articles and essays. He's been carrying out academic research to PhD level. And he has been opening up new avenues of research in the music of the Irish diaspora on both sides of the Atlantic, especially in the areas of discography and of new traditions shaped by urban environments. In the catalogue of the Irish Traditional Music Archive, you get over 150 hits if you search for Reg Hall. And these hits cover audio recordings, printed materials and visual materials. He's been everywhere. The latest CD in which he's actually playing appeared just last year, 2015, a collaboration with two younger London Irish musicians, John Blake and Lamont Gillespie. He broadcasts fortnightly on the leading radio arts channel Resonance FM of London. And now he has crowned all of that with these three staggering new and monumental publications from Topic Records of London. The first publication is a package of 3 CDs. I have to show them to you like that. 3 CDs and a 90-page booklet, closely printed and closely detailed booklet. And it's called It Was Mighty, Early Days of Irish Music in London. and it documents the mainly rural musicians from the west of Ireland who are part of the wave of Irish emigrants engaged on the post-war reconstruction of Britain. It was a hard-working, hard-playing, hard-drinking culture, and the pub was central to social and musical life, which is little wonder when the alternative was a grotty bed sitting room with the frying pan and the gas ring out on the landing. Certain people here of a certain age will remember that kind of life. But musicians from different counties of Ireland were able to meet up in London in ways that they could never have done at home, and they began to forge new sounds and a new tradition of Irish traditional music. They are here in this package with their music and their stories, and Reg will be telling you much more about them in a moment. The second package is called It Was Great Altogether, the continuing tradition of Irish music in London. This also consists of 3 CDs and a booklet, but this time it's a 100-page booklet, and the period covered is from the mid-1960s to about the present time. The post-war immigrants have now become a settled ethnic community, and their music has been handed on in various ways and has been practiced by their children and grandchildren who have been born in Britain, and some of whom have since gone on to live in Ireland and enrich musical life there. Their music and their stories are also to be found here. Again, more to come from Reg. We'd all agree, I think, that Irish traditional music isn't a single tradition, but rather that it is made up of bundles of different traditions, differing in period, place, language, instrument, and so on. Here we are fortunate to have excellent documentation of one of the recent Irish traditions, a post-war Irish diasporic tradition which had a beginning, a middle, but not yet an end. It will go on. In fact, later tonight at the Skerries Traditional Music Archive, there's a presentation on the Galway fiddle player Joe O'Leary, and relatives of his appear on the continuing tradition package here, Alan, Rosie and Claire O'Leary, who are leading lights in Irish music in London currently. So the thing continues and the network broadens all the time. Unlike many Irish music traditions, Irish music in London in the period we're talking about, mid-40s to the present, has had someone to document it from the inside with authority in a way that's reminiscent of the documentation made at another time by Captain Francis O'Neill in Chicago. In London, Reg has been the boy in the gap. And if all that weren't enough, we have to celebrate a third new publication of his today, a publication of a very different kind. Based on his original research, it's a book, but not a book as we would understand the term until recently. Taking advantage of new technology, as he always has, Reg has revised and rewritten his doctoral thesis of 1994, which is on a shelf down there. He's added a wealth of photographs and reproduced ephemera and memorabilia and other images to it, and he's produced an e-book, an electronic book of 1,025 pages. It's a staggering amount of information, a staggering amount of work. It's entitled A Few Tunes of Good Music, a history of Irish music and dance in London, 1800 to 1980 and beyond. That's just the first page of it. That is not Reg. He asked me to point out that that's not himself. You'll understand from that title, therefore, that it takes the relatively recent story of Irish music in London that the CD packages tell, and it pushes that story back into the early 20th century and into the 19th century, and indeed back into the 18th century. Much of its information comes from weary hours spent peering at a microfilm reader in the British newspaper archive in Colindale, research that no one else had carried out before Reg did. And there's a wealth of information hidden in newspapers on Irish music in London and Britain generally, in fact. It's now coming out through digitisation processes, but in the old days it had to be done through a microfilm reader, very tedious work. He did it. The major topics of the book are music of the rural Irish tradition, music of the Gaelic revival, and music of evolving urban traditions in London and wider Britain. And although the book is based on an academic thesis, it, and indeed the thesis, is written in a clear, lively and colourful style. It's personality-based, and it contains much valuable information that's not to be found elsewhere. Particularly striking is the uncovering of early 20th century working class Irish Catholic music traditions of the East End of London and of South East London, which I for one hadn't known about. If it were a conventional book, it's not a conventional book, it's an electronic book, but if it were a conventional book, it would be this size. That Reg earlier today presented the printout of the electronic book to the archive. So we have it here in physical terms. That's 1,025 pages. You can just simply imagine the amount of work that went into that. But it's not a conventional book, and in fact it fits on that comfortably in its digitized electronic form. It takes up no space at all on your computer or your iPad, to which it can be downloaded in seconds from the Topic Records of London website. It's fully searchable by machine. If you're only interested, say, in fiddle, you just search for the word fiddle and you'll find every instance of the word fiddle in the 1,025 pages. If you're interested in a particular musician, similarly you can search for the name. If you're interested in yourself, you could search for yourself even, and instantly you're brought to that information. It's an extraordinary advance in information, and it's added to his thesis of 1994, but it's also machine searchable. Extraordinary thing. And it's completely free. It's a free gift from Reg and Topic Records of London to anyone who's interested in this material. If you're technically able, if you have a computer, if you have an iPad and that, in seconds you have the 1,025 pages and all the wonderful and original information that it contains. The CD and the booklet packages, on the other hand, are available for purchase here today or online later if you wish. So finally, who is this man who's done all this? And how has he come to make this sterling contribution to Irish music in all its aspects? Well, Reg was born in Kent in 1933. He actually celebrated his 83rd birthday 4 days ago. Unlikely though it seems when you look at him. He's English of the English, and therefore he has an Irish strain in his ancestry. One of his 4 great-grandmothers was an Irish immigrant to London in the post-famine period. Her name was Anne O'Mealy, and she worked as a dairymaid in Marylebone and married an English street trader, and Reg is part of that descent. His day job was as a social worker, a probation officer in inner London, dealing with people that most of us would not even want to know about, not mind deal with. Reg was musical from the beginning, played piano, and he was drawn to vernacular music, not classical music, but vernacular music of all the kinds that were to be heard on radio and record in the years after the Second World War. American swing and American jazz, blues, but also English country dance music. And this led him to the melodeon and to the setting up in 1956 of the Rakes, an English country dance band that also accompanied the singer Bob Davenport and also played Irish music. Reg was becoming very aware of Irish traditional music in those same years of the early 50s, hearing it on the BBC programmes of Alan Lomax and Seamus Ennis and Peter Kennedy. And he first came into playing contact with it in the person of the Sligo fiddle player Michael Gorman and the Cork singer and banjoist Margaret Barry. Michael Gorman invited him to play melodeon with him, and the rest is history. Reg has been involved in Irish traditional music in London in all the years since, and has been playing with Irish musicians since at their request, in venues of every kind, and in residencies in the Favourite and the Old Triangle pubs, to name just 2. As a piano player, he's been a kind of a magnet for musicians who appreciate the steady and reliable support of his playing and are kept together by it. And he hasn't neglected his early love of English traditional music either. Apart from record production in the field, and he's been involved in that, he has played fiddle with the Brampton Morris side for over 50 years and with the Padstow Hobby House for over 40 years. And his book on the life and music of the Sussex concertina player Scan Tester is on our shelves down there around the corner. So we're indebted to Reg Hall and to Topic Records, publishers, for these publications, which are ours to enjoy in the first instance, because enjoyment has been the basic reason why Reg has been involved in this music. They're publications to have and to live and to dip into and to go back to and to absorb over time. Reg produced his first record for Topic in 1963. He was involved with Bill Leader in the production of the famous Topic LP Paddy and the Smoke in 1965, and now it's 2016 and the collaboration of Reg Hall and Topic Records continues. And since he's as interested and as involved as ever, I've no doubt but that there will be more to come. Reg was awarded the Gold Medal of the English Folk Dance and Song Society in 1987. He was awarded a doctorate in history from Sussex University in 1994, and he was awarded the Gradam na Gilthori of the TG Carr Gradam Hiol Awards in 2009. The Irish Traditional Music Archive isn't an institution that gives awards, but it shows its appreciation of the worth of publications by archiving them, by acquiring them, preserving them forever, and by making them available to all in various ways. The works of Reg Hall are already an important and valued part of its collections, and these 3 new publications form an enormous increment to what we already hold from him. So on behalf of us all here in Ireland and of the Irish emigrants whose music he has documented so carefully for over 3 centuries, I thank him for his work and for the way he has done it, and I declare these 3 new publications launched. And now pleased to hand over to Reg.
Well, can you hear me? Is that loud enough? Yeah. Well, I really just don't know what to say after all that. I wish my wife were here to hear it, and that would explain why I've not painted the kitchen. Nicholas, you've taken the wind out of my sails to an extent, because I was going to say little bits of that about the book, but it's not necessary anymore. And I think that the only thing I want to do now is to hand over to the musicians. I want them to speak, really. That's been my aim all the time. When I started sort of seriously doing the history of Irish music in London, I really wanted to interview people I knew before they died. In the 1980s, terrible things were happening. Musicians were just collapsing all around. And I could see the music was changing, and the music that I loved and the atmosphere and the general sort of attitude of everybody was beginning to change, and new people were coming in with new ideas. It wasn't the same. It's quite valid. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that happening, except that bit of the Irish music that meant an awful lot to me and to a lot of other people was going. And I thought, what I'll do is I will interview people and get their life stories. And clearly, once I started doing life stories, they're linear. I don't know if it's, who's your mother, who's your father, who played, who taught you, boom, boom, what did you win, where did you come to? It's linear. And you get 50 linear life stories. So what? What's that prove? It's only when you see the connections between going across, the sort of lateral thinking. And that led me really to ask questions. And once you ask questions of, why did you do that? How did you do it? Did the priest enjoy you doing that? Did anyone disapprove? Did you make money? Where did you learn? Boom, boom, boom. Once you get answers to that question, there's another question. And then you pursue that. And then you get something out of a newspaper and it doesn't make sense. And then you try and pursue that. And in the end, I got back to 1800, didn't I? And I didn't mean to, but what I exposed for history, I mean, historians talk about, I don't know if you've thought about it, history isn't what happened. History is what historians have found out happened. So there's lots of, everything that's gone on before now is lost unless it's actually documented by historians. And clearly there was a whole lot of activity by Irish people and Irish descendants in London that nobody knew about. The fife and drum bands. Now, who's ever heard of the Borough Pipe Band? Okay, they played in Dublin in 1912, but nobody would know about that. But it was intense. The people in Borough Market, in Southwark, Irish descendants, they learnt tunes that were brought over at the famine. And they were picking up tunes from grandparents. Now, nobody knew about that. Who knew about the Wapping Fife and Drum Band? 200 people are said to have played in the, not at the same time, 200 people are known to have played in the Wapping Fife and Drum Band, Catholic, St Patrick's Fife and Drum Band in the 20s and the 30s. Lost to history. So that my doing these linear interviews and then going sideways and investigating in all different sorts of ways. And because I'm English, I have a different view, I have a different angle. And because I actually know about jazz, I see the Irish music slightly different from most Irish people. So the thing that I've achieved there that I'm sort of most proud of, I suppose, is that I've given back to history things about the Gaelic League, things about the working class people in the East End of London. The music hall, the Gaelic League poo-pooed anything on the music hall as being stage Irish. No, it wasn't stage Irish. Just because an Irishman is on the stage doesn't make him a stage Irishman. In the 1860s, 1870s, there were Irish step dancers, Irish comedians, Irish singers. And who were they playing to in London? They were playing to Irish people. So that isn't stage Irish. So I've rehabilitated a whole tradition of clog dancing, step dancing, fiddle playing, all sorts of things. So that's what I feel I've achieved there. But now perhaps I'll let the musicians talk. And I'll get onto this set of work. Now, my main concern has been the music from about 1945. Before that, clearly there were Irish people playing. They were the London Irish. Now, this is a term that you must understand. The London Irish is not the same as Irish in London. The London Irish was that community of people descended from the famine refugees. My great-grandmother was London Irish. My grandfather was half London Irish. He was a Cockney. Lots of them became Cockneys, and a lot of their culture went into Cockney street culture. But the London Irish, they invented Céilí dancing, they promoted the war pipes, they had uilleann pipers in London, and they ran the dance halls before the war. But it was after the war that the west of Ireland people, mostly west, south of Ireland, country people came in tens of thousands to work in London. I guess most of you know about that. If you weren't around, or your grandparents or your parents would have known about it. And they brought with them their baggage, and their baggage was their culture. They brought... A lot of people don't realise this, but immediately after the war, there was a great spontaneous revival in interest in rural Ireland in their own music. Cultures came along in 51, 52, but it all was happening before that. So that these people who came over in 1946, 47, 48, 49 to London actually had that immediate revival in their background. There were the carnivals, there were the touring the touring Céilí bands. There was bits and pieces on Radio Éireann. 1951, Paddy O'Brien's accordion records were coming out. This is pre-Cultus. They claim the revival. No, it was all spontaneous, immediately after what you would call the emergency. So when they came to London, there was an Irish community, which was the London Irish, but these two communities really, they went to church together, but they were quite separate. So all the London Irish infrastructure was foreign to the new Irish immigrants, and they gravitated to the pubs. They colonised a load of backstreet London pubs. They were really old, nice old-fashioned wooden floors, Victorian, lovely glasswork and everything. And they worked hard, and for the first time in their life, they had money. Most of them had never earned any money in rural Ireland. If they did, they always gave it to their father. So here were these fellows, these young lads, 16 to about 30. Incidentally, there were more women than men, but that seems to have been lost to history. And there was no tradition of Irish music in pubs in Ireland, and they didn't expect to play the music in pubs in London. Many of them didn't even bring their fiddles and flutes over with them because they were going to go back next year, weren't they? They didn't. They stayed for 50 years. But they had money, and they drank. And there was it wasn't too bad. There wasn't much violence. There wasn't much drunkenness. There was a lot of respectability. People actually brought their manners, the way they behaved at home, into the pubs in London. And gradually, the invitation got round, would you play a tune, boom, boom, boom. And the first session was in the Devonshire Arms in Kentish Town. And it was like a kitchen at home. Somebody was very subtly in charge. Everybody was in the drinks round. Everybody knew everybody. They all knew their mums and their dads and everything. And they were all from one little area, Tubbercurry, into Mayo, possibly up into Roscommon, down into Roscommon. From there, that session was once a week, about 1946. Now, who was there? Martin Wynne, famous. Oh, I've lost the man who went to, Alan, help me, Philadelphia. Who was the fiddle? Johnny Vasey. Johnny Vasey. It was popular every week. The landlord, to make sure that they came in every week, paid a little bit or gave them free drinks. Then another pub started, which was the Black Cap in Camden Town, and that attracted people from all over rural Ireland. And before long, it was buzzing in Camden Town and Kentish Town. There was another pub that seems to be lost. People don't know about it. The Tavistock, Westbourne Park, and Joe Cooley was playing there. The famous Joe Cooley was playing in London. And anyway, we'll get on to that in just a minute. So I'd like to start playing some of the recordings to you, just to give you a feel of what it was all about. Michael Gorman was born in the 1890s. He was from near Tubbercurry in County Sligo. He was second cousin to Michael Coleman. He learned from James E. Gannon, who was Tom Gannon's father, and he was deep into that Sligo tradition. He'd been to London from 1920 onwards. By about 1938, he was permanently here. I thought I was in London for a minute. And he had nowhere to play. He didn't like the dance halls. He would occasionally play at some party or other, but mostly he played at home. So when these Sligo lads were coming over in the late 40s, they made for his house. And young fellas like Johnny Vasey, who he taught in Sligo in the 30s, they had the music there. And he didn't realise he could go into pubs, and it was ages before he went into the pubs. He was a railwayman, he was a porter. And at the age of 56, he retired because he thought he might play like the rest of the lads did in the pubs. And he was, at the age of 56, he was regarded by all the young lads as the grand old man of Irish music in London. Michael Gorman. So could we have the first track? Michael Gorman from County Sligo. Now, Paddy Malynn was from County Longford, and he was from the same place as Packy Dolan and Frank Quinn, who made records in the 20s in America. And when Packy Dolan came over on a holiday in about 1931, and he played round that locality house dances, Paddy Malynn's mum was there as a young woman and dancing to Packy Dolan. There was house dancing in the Malynn household, a little cottage just outside the town of Longford. And as a schoolboy, his school teacher, if I can remember the name, was Liam Farrell. Would that be right? Who was later featured in Cultus Cultoriana Éireann. And he played the school kids tunes from O'Neill, and they individually picked up instruments, mandolin, banjo, the accordion, the fiddle, by ear from just Liam playing the piano, and formed the children's band, the Longford Céilí Band, which eventually became Young Men after the war. But they were playing and touring the north of Ireland, the northern counties of Ireland, that is, before the war, and making broadcasts on the radio. And Paddy played his first solo on the accordion at the age of 9 on the radio from Dublin. Now, he learnt from musicians in the house who came for the dancing, and Felix Doran, the famous travelling piper, used to come to Longford regularly, and he was always invited in for bread and jam and a cup of tea and a few tunes. So that was Paddy Malynn's background. When he came to London about 1950, to get work, he took over from Joe Cooley in the Tavistock Arms and was playing there on Sunday mornings, and eventually got a job in the Emerald Dance Hall, playing every night of the week for £1 a night, alternating with the modern dance band. And he had to play for the Old Time Waltz, the Siege of Venice, the Waves of Tory, would it be, and the Barn Dance, while the modern band played foxtrots and quicksteps and things like that. Eventually, he played in every pub in London. He knew everybody, and he played with Jimmy Power and me in The Favourite for years. And he played at my wedding. There we are. Paddy Malynn with a tune he got from home, Wallop the Spot. Paddy used to tell a story. Before he left Longford and he moved to Dublin as a young fella, and he was a postman and he was delivering mail one day, and he heard this wonderful music coming out of the house that he was delivering to, and he knocked on the door and discovered these two musicians. And as he said, he didn't deliver any more letters that day. The two musicians were Bobby Casey and Wille Clancy, who were living in Dublin. Then they were very, very soon in London, and they were playing all over Camden Town, particularly in the Laurel Tree. And I saw Casey many, many times. I never saw Clancy playing in the Laurel Tree, but I saw him a few times playing in different places. We now know, they were the governors, but it wasn't really known then. I mean, they were just ordinary blokes. They were just the fellas. Bobby Casey, for years and years, played in backstreet pubs for peanuts and played to his mates and played to people who weren't listening or people who got very excited and went along with it. And of course, we all know that he was one of the most outstanding Irish musicians ever, I guess. This is a great favourite of mine, a great reel. You know, who could write a better reel than the old Bush? Now, Edmond Murphy was a fiddle player, and he learnt the fiddle from an old travelling dancing teacher, John Toohey, I think from somewhere on the Roscommon Sligo border. The story is that he would go from house to house by convention. People knew it, and he'd earn enough money, and then he'd drink it and waste his money, and then move on to the next house. His father had taught dancing to Michael Gorman's brother, and that was when Michael Gorman learnt to dance. So it's all sort of wheels within wheels. Edmond Murphy was a young man, a teenager. He used to go into Tubbercurry and listen outside the shop where they had the records. They sold the records because they would play Carolan records and Coleman records just to get custom. And that's how he stood outside and picked up the tunes just listening at the door. He came to England and became some sort of contractor, some sort of in the building trade. And Mick Gorman, who was Michael Gorman's nephew, was looking for a job, and Edmond Murphy employed him, so that it was boss and workman together, fiddle and flute. And this is, to my mind, great Sligo music. Listen to the feet. The thing about these two fellas is they thump like mad, and that's all part of the music. Now, you know, cultists and competition people say, don't stamp your feet. There's another story I'd like to tell you about Michael Dwyer, who was from County Cork, a bit younger than these fellas, and he had the most beautiful feet when he played the tin whistle. Absolutely wonderful. And in one of the competitions, the adjudicator said, oh, you shouldn't tap your feet. And he stopped. And you think, Jesus, why? Here we've got these two Sligo fellows with a great thump. They both had it, and this is the concert reel. Pity to fade it, but I've got to get a lot of music into this little show here. This was pub music. This was what was played pretty well every night of the week, some pub somewhere in London. Eventually, it was, if that's the size of London now, and we're talking about that little area there, by 1956, 57, 58, it was there, it was there, it was there, it was everywhere. Different Dagenham, Croydon, everywhere. But the centres were still Paddington and Fulham and Hammersmith and Camden Town. There had been a tradition amongst the London Irish before the war of the dance halls, and the first Irish dance hall was set up by Frank Lee around about 1933, 34. And it was taken, and then there were the Clancy brothers, who were wrestlers. They had a dance hall. And there was Johnny Muldoon, who was from Ballymote. And as someone, don't pass this on, but as somebody said to me, they were the Irish mafia. A lot of bullying, a lot of violence went on behind the scenes. But anyway, these dance halls were still going in 1956, 57. But not really to the taste of the new Irish population. Still saxophones and trumpets and violins and piano accordions and quick steps and a little bit of Céilí dancing in the middle. And in 1957, John Byrne from County Cork, I think, he'd worked for Clancy and he broke away from Clancy, and he hired a hall in Cricklewood, and he did a very clever thing. He had the hall, but he had two halls in the same building. And for the same price, you could go into the hall and you could choose to do modern dancing or Céilí dancing. And he needed a resident Céilí band, and he got together a band of all the great musicians. So successful that he opened in 1960, 59, somewhere like that, he opened the Hibernian Dance Hall in Fulham Broadway. And luckily we've got a recording of that. And that's Brendan McGlinchey on the fiddle, Roger Sherlock from Sligo on the flute, Raymond Roland, great accordion player from, it was Galway, wasn't it? Galway, yeah. And my great pal Liam Farrell on the banjo and one or two others. Here we are. Farrell told me that I never actually saw that at the Hibernian. I didn't go. I went to Skelty Moor, but never went to Hibernian. And he said that it started at 8 o'clock, and everybody knew what the routine was. All the audience, they queued up, and the floor was packed at 8 o'clock, 2 or 3 nights a week at the weekend. And Siege of Venice, there were 4 facing 4. And then another 4 facing 4, and another 4 facing 4, and another 4 facing 4, and about 20 sets down the room, packed. And it was the same every night that they played, and they said the same routine. I can't remember exactly, but there was an old time waltz and a barn dance or staccabali or something like that. And Liam was absolutely over the moon telling me about it. He was so excited. Great music. I mean, it sounds like the Tulla to me. I mean, it's just got that rolling sort of West of Ireland sound to it. But they didn't play quick steps and foxtrots. That was all Céilí music. Now, the thing about Céilí dancing, you know that the Gaelic League, it was stiff and formal and hand movements and all this business, and it was it 6s and 7s or 3s and 5s or whatever. You know what I mean. But what these people were doing was they were dancing in the old kitchen house dance with a low centre of gravity, their bums sticking out, their faces looking over the other person's shoulder, the stare in the eyes, you know, that wonderful way that people danced in the cottages. And they were doing that to the Siege of Ennis in the Hibernian. Now, a great accordion player in the early 60s, he came over to... He played a lot in London. He learnt a lot in London. He was from Clare. And he came over to the All Ireland and won the All Ireland with the Gooseberry Bush, great reel. And for a long time, everyone was playing the Gooseberry Bush. That was Martin McMahon. And he married Teresa Britton, who was from the Tipperary accordion area. Now, I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but the accordion in Ireland really comes from Galway and Connemara, Tipperary and Wexford. They were the three areas where the accordion sort of grew up. So here was a Clare accordion player marrying a Tipperary accordion player, Martin and Teresa McMahon. And they went professional as the caravels going around social clubs, weddings, dance halls. The occasional pub would have them for dancing. She sang, played the piano, and he played the accordion. And they were the fabulous caravels. Oh, that's what it used to say on the adverts, the fabulous caravels. But he also played the fiddle. And she vamped the guitar. So let's have a little bit of that. Now, have you ever heard fiddle playing like this? Martin and Teresa McMahon. Oliver Roland, I never met, I never saw him, but I was always hearing about him. Lucy Farr said, oh, he's a great accordion player. And somehow our paths never crossed, and he left and went home to Galway. We've got this home recording that came through the family. A friend of mine, his aunt, you know, the way it is, he located this recording, done sometime in the 60s. And the tune is Imelda Roland's. Now, Imelda was Raymond Roland's sister and Oliver Roland's sister, and she made this tune. So it's rather fitting that we have Oliver playing Imelda's tune. Right, Liam Farrell came over from County Tyrone round about 1956, 57, 58, and I saw him playing at a fesh, and I was knocked over by his playing, a young lad, playing the four-string banjo, the tenor banjo. Subsequently, I got to know him very well, and I asked him, where did you learn the four-string banjo, the tenor banjo? Because the five-string banjo was what the Travellers played in Ireland, and so where does that come from? We know that in America, the Flanagan brothers, and it was played, but it wasn't really played this side of the Atlantic. People played the mandolin banjo, or what in Ireland is called the banjo mandolin, little tiny thing. How did you get? He said, I don't know. He said, I started on the little one and got the big one, but I don't really know how it started. Well, in my view, he was the first banjo player of that sort of banjo in London, and he reckons that the first one in Ireland was Barney McKenna. So unless somebody can prove otherwise, I think that the tenor banjo that we all know now came from those two guys. Liam, still playing. His hands play him up every now and then, but he's still playing. Here he is playing with a great pal of his and a great pal of mine, Joe Whelan, who died just a few years ago. They played in the dance halls, they played in the Galtimore, they played in the pubs. But in the later years, they were playing in Saturday nights in pubs in South London, which is a bit unusual. They played in Croydon, where I used to play with them sometimes. Here they are in 1998, playing a hornpipe. Now, I played Edmond Murphy with Mick Gorman earlier on in the evening, and they were pretty hot in their day. Even Radio Aaron thought they were and played their tracks fairly often. But Mick Gorman went up to Manchester and we lost him. And Edmond Murphy was at a dead end, and he met up with Con Curtin, who had been around for years. He was from Kerry. Now, there was one from Kerry and one from Sligo. And I can remember them playing together and thinking, oh, they'll never make it. Somehow, their music was a bit like that. But within about 6 weeks, they were the hottest thing in London. So here they are, rough, exciting music, played in the Favourite, around about 1970. Con Curtin, Edmond Murphy on the fiddles, with a reel called Derry Craig. Lucy Farr was born in Ballinakiln, County Galway in 1912, and she came from a musical family. Her dad played the flute, I think. She knew all the original members of the Hibernian Céilí Band, who were famous sort of 1928 onwards. And they all, she danced in their houses and they played in her house. And she was a great pal of Aggie White, who you probably know as a great fiddle player herself. Now, when Lucy came to England, she went in for nursing. And as a nurse, she couldn't play in the nurses' quarters. She didn't play. And although she'd been a great player, really keen player as a teenager, and she married an English Catholic fellow who sort of encouraged her to play a little bit at home. And her sister, who was living over here, said, "You never believe it, but at the Elephant, they're dancing sets in the pub." And she couldn't believe it. So they go one night to this pub at the Elephant and Castle, and there's Paddy Breen and one or two others playing up on a high stage, 2 flutes and a fiddle. And there's dancing sets in London. They didn't even do that in the dance halls. So, okay, she was encouraged to get the fiddle out, and she started to play, particularly with Paddy Breen, and then eventually with Jimmy Power. She was a woman in a man's world, and she was always very sensitive about... she played in the Céilí Band, and 8 or 9 players, and she was the only woman. But we allowed her to buy drinks, so eventually she found, she found her own sense of equality with us. Her husband died, and she somehow sort of was greatly released. Not relieved, released. And she went mad on the music, and she went everywhere. There's a famous story that's in my head. I rang her, it's on a tape, hang on. It's on a tape. And she used to make tapes of herself, playing and practicing, and she'd give me a tape of something, you see, and I played the tape and turned it over, and there she is, practicing away, and the phone goes. "Hello, Reg. It's me. Hello, Reg. Yes, Saturday. Yes, 8 o'clock. Right." And puts the phone down and says to herself, "Goody, goody, goody, I'm going to play with the boys." Now, beat that. And that's on a tape, and I've got it. You could say, "It's 9 o'clock now, Lucy. Could we meet you at 10?" And that was she was like that. She'd go anywhere. I went with my wife to visit her the day after she was 90, and she was still learning tunes. How about that? Lucy Farr, with a tune, I think it's Jenny's Welcome to Charlie. She called it the long note. It's a single jig. Now, if Lucy Farr was a woman in a man's world, so was Julia Clifford. But back home, as a teenager, she'd been seen in her own little sort of rural community as a great fiddle player. And she was the younger sister of Dennis the Weaver, Dennis Murphy. But she came over to Britain and she worked as a chambermaid, and she tried to be a nurse at one stage, but she mostly did hotel work. And she couldn't play anywhere, nobody wanted. But eventually she got into one of the dance bands that played in the dance halls. And I guess she had to fake playing the quick steps and things. But okay, she played the reels and the jigs for the Céilí dancing. And she married Johnny Clifford from back home. And then they had a son, Billy Clifford. She was very late in discovering the pub scene because she played in little dance halls. What I should tell you is that I've got a list of the dance halls in London from about 1945 to about 1970. I think there are 40 named. I think there are about 40 dance halls. Some of them didn't last very long. Some of them, you know, the mafia moved in and beat everybody up and smashed the place up. But I think there's about 40. And she played in a number of them, but she had that beautiful old Kerry style, and I'm not going to play any slides because it's not on the disc. Billy and her son Billy and Julia, fiddle and flute, the Harlequin hornpipe. Been playing, in my opinion, is the old-fashioned music, the pretty well unspoilt. This is the way they brought it from home, and okay, they had to settle into London. I suppose styles change a bit, but that's basically the old-fashioned traditional music that survived in London. This is a wee bit more modern. This is a Céilí Band, and we all know that Céilí Bands sort of follow certain modern conventions, but it has some star players. Bobby Casey, Brendan Mulcair, a fellow called Adrian Burke on the fiddles, Roger Sherlock and a younger fellow, Paul Gallagher on the flutes, Tommy Keane on the uilleann pipes, John Bow from Offaly, great accordion player, he's the leader of the band, Mick O'Connor, the banjo player, been playing for years and years and years since a young lad, still playing now in London, banjo player, Kevin Taylor, Paddy Taylor's son on the piano, and Mick Whelan, who's Joe Whelan's brother, on the drums. So I'll end the music session of this little entertainment now with the Thatch Céilí Band playing The Rakes of Clonmel. that's all the music I'm going to play you. I'd like to show you some photographs. Now, you probably realise that recordings weren't part of the scene. I mean, nobody had tape recorders to any extent, and we're lucky that we've actually got those recordings. But cameras were even rarer. Nobody ever thought, you know, some people thought to go in and take a recording if they had a portable tape recorder. Very few people thought about going into anywhere and taking a photograph. Very few of these Irish musicians would have had a camera, and those that had a camera wouldn't have a flashlight. So it's very rare that we've got any photographs of the London scene, but I'm just going to show you a few, and I'll talk a little bit about them. So can we have the first photograph? Michael Gorman, Wille Clancy, Bobby Casey, Martin Burns. What a band. I never saw them all play together, but I saw them in various combinations. I remember going out into the Soho Fair. They took over a whole of Soho for 2 weeks, and they put on poetry and waiters' races and all sorts of things. And these two, Michael Gorman and Wille Clancy, were busking in the street on one evening. I saw them there. Okay, I don't know when that was taken. It doesn't look like a press photograph, but it might have been. And the next gent, please. Now that is Tony Martin, who was from Belmullet, and he was a fiddle maker and repairer. He used to repair everybody's fiddle. He was professional, he made his living repairing violins for the big stuff, but he did repairs for all the traditional players and didn't take a penny for it. That's Danny McNiff, the flute player from Leitrim, Michael Gorman, Jimmy Dunleavy from Bahola and Mayo. Now, that was typical of the early days. They'd get a little job playing sort of cabaret, as it were, in a dance hall, or that might have been a competition where they might have been competing with an opera singer and a ventriloquist or something like that. That's what that event was. Mick Gorman, the flute player, and what's his name? I've forgotten his name now. Sligo Murphy. Edmond Murphy, without the feet. We cut the feet off. That was typical. I mean, very unusual over a microphone. That was probably at a parish concert. And the next. Now, this was the first night of Cultus in 1957 in Hammersmith. I do know who the fiddle player is, but I can't remember. I never knew him. That's Patsy Goulding, a lovely piano player, London Irish. Her dad was Pat Goulding, a piper, born in Deptford, Cork family. She was a dancing teacher, and she made the transition from being London Irish into playing with the Irish in London. Michael Gorman and the great Paddy Breen playing his flageolet. Now that flageolet is like a tin whistle, but it had a detachable end with a fiddle top, like a tin whistle. But he once had a transverse top to it, so he could play it as a piccolo, but he lost it. But anyway, there he is. On the records where it says he's playing the tin whistle, he's actually playing that as a flageolet. And the next, please. Now, that is Julia Clifford and her husband John. Now, John, everybody knew that he played the piano accordion, but here he is at that early Cultus session, 1957, playing the Hona, which of course he used to play when he was back home in Kerry. And the next. Michael Daly. Now, Michael Daly was from Arigna, and he was the first cousin of John McKenna. And he came over as a poor man. He actually got himself into severe poverty through illness. He ended up in a hospital bed with no clothes because they were all been taken away from him, very ill, and in Croydon. And he ended up, the nuns took him to Worthing and they put him on his feet. He ended up as the mayor of Worthing, and he owned a restaurant and made his money, and he had a big house. And because he had a big house and had money, he had a tape recorder, and he was responsible for recording some of the stuff on this here. Great man. he was the man who started Cultus in London, Michael Daly. And the next. Now, Seamus Ennis and Martin Burns. Now, he was Martin Burns in those days. Mochin came later. Everybody called him Martin Burns. Now, Seamus Ennis was around. He was headhunted by the BBC to be a field collector on part-time salary for a few years in the 50s. And he did a lot of freelancing. He did a lot of drinking and a lot of hanging around the BBC. He didn't take very much interest, as far as I know, in the Irish musicians. He had a free hand with the BBC recording library that he could record more or less who he wanted to, and it's very interesting. He recorded nobody except a couple of singers. Martin Burns. What can you say about Martin Burns? And the next. Now, this is typical, you see. This is an event. It's not a pub. It's not a dance hall. And it's not cultus. It's some sort of event in some club. Probably those people didn't give two monkeys about Irish traditional music, although they probably are Irish. I don't know. It may be unfair to them. But Martin Burns, Bobby Casey, look at the way they're dressed up. They weren't wearing the uniform with the blue serge suit. I don't know quite what happened to that. And that is Eddie Bolger from Wexford, who was one of the great pioneers of Irish music in London. What a trio that was. There's a great story. It's in the book, but I'll tell you anyway. They went to a pub, and it finished at sort of after hours, about midnight. And in the markets in London, because the market traders went out early, the pubs used to open at about 1 in the morning to about 4 in the morning. So they end up in one of these pubs, having got quite drunk at the pub that they'd left. So they go to one of the market pubs, and they leave that at about 4 or 5 in the morning, still quite drunk. They get in a train and go to Southend in Essex, just as the pubs are opening. And they go and found a pub at 10 o'clock in the morning and get the instruments out, and they get quite drunk. And they get thrown out the pub at 2 o'clock or 2:30, and they're in Southend, the river, the beach. They think they'll busk on the beach. So they get the instruments out to play, and a great big 6-foot, 7-foot policeman comes along and threatens them, and that's the end of that. But it's a nice story. The three of them, Bobby Casey, Eddie Bolger, and Martin Burns. Now, this is I can't really see them all. This is one of the first editions of the band in the Galtymore. This fella, I think, is Johnny Dorian from Donegal. That's Sonny Murray, the concertina player. Bobby Casey, Roger Sherlock on the flute, Joe Ryan on the fiddle, and what's his name? Kit O'Connor on the accordion from Connemara. And that on the piano is Sean Kenny. Now, Sean Kenny was a piano player from the London Irish. He wasn't West of Ireland, he was a Cockney, real Cockney, wasn't he? And, he'd had a Céilí Band in London before the war. And he didn't know anything about these lads, except the pub next to where he lived was the pub that they frequented. And he goes in there one day, what's it called? Anyway, in Camden Town. And the lads are playing. And of course, he's a pianist. Very, very nice piano player. And the next gent, please. Jimmy Power, my mate. Typical Jimmy. Now, he was from Waterford. There weren't very many players in Waterford at the time. He learned from, the odd few fiddle players that were around. And his dad was... His uncle was a melodeon player, and actually, before the war, answered an advertisement in a newspaper and bought a set of uilleann pipes. Now, nobody amongst these rural people, these rural farmers, it was a labouring family, they didn't have any money, none of them would have had the uilleann pipes, but this man did. His uncle and Jimmy learnt the uilleann pipes a little bit, and they played together, fiddle and melodeon, fiddle and pipes. He was more or less thrown out of his village by his priest. There's no work for you here, power. So he went up to the north of Ireland and joined the British Army. There's an advert goes up on the post looking for pipers, and he could play the fiddle, so he opted to be a piper, self-taught, and he had to play the uilleann pipes in the officers' mess on dining-in nights. Anyway, he was my great pal, played at my wedding. I played, I reckon, once a week for 21 years with Jimmy Power. There we are, Jimmy. Great. Oh, what a jig player. I mean, to the way that people play the jigs now, he actually articulated the jig and he made you want to dance. He just had the gift and he could play very well for step dancing. Jimmy Power. And the next. Paddy Taylor. County Limerick, his mother was a concertina player. He came over and in 1933, something like that, as a young man, and sat in with Frank Lee's Céilí Band in Fulham, got the job, and then played regularly. Right, he's not on any of the records. He said I didn't play close enough to the way they played. They were all readers, but he was clearly a country player. And he had a sister who played the melodeon, and then his son played the piano. You've heard him already. Paddy Taylor, great Paddy Taylor. And the next. Have we got any more? Now, this is a Hibernian band. PJ, whatever his name is, on the piano. I didn't know him. Brendan McGlinchey, Roger Sherlock, saxophone player I don't know. Liam Farrell. Now, he's playing a funny old banjo there. My guess is that his other banjo was stolen, and that's a fill-in. Raymond Roland, the drummer, I didn't know him, I didn't know the bass player. That is the Hibernian Céilí Band that you heard. And are there any more? I'm not sure, are there? Raymond Roland and Lucy Farr. I think it's a great photo. The Irish Centre wasn't a pub, and it wasn't Coltus, and it wasn't a dance hall. It was a club, but it ran as a pub on Sunday mornings, and they had the music. Raymond Roland, and Lucy Farr. And here we've got Michael Gorman in the middle, Margaret Barry. She was from County Cork. She wasn't a tinker. She wasn't a traveller. She was what she called a gypsy. And her whole family. I mean, they're in O'Neill. Tom, what's his name? Robert Thompson? Yes, Robert Thompson was a piper. That was her grandfather. But there are other people in O'Neill who were relatives of hers. They were to my opinion, they were a great combination for a period. I mean, from 1956 till about 1959 in the Bedford Arms and in all sorts of pubs, they were the tops. They then went off to Ireland and did one-night stands and did a tour of America. Then they got hypochondria. They were rivals in their hypochondria, and things went downhill. They came back to London in the early 60s, and I had some sort of relationship with them, took them around a little bit, but they never were the same as they were in the 50s. But Jimmy Power was their great pal. He used to go and see them every Saturday morning, take their bets in for them, and talk about music. Gorman would teach him tunes that he needed to know, teach him bits of bowing, and there were times when the two bows playing together. I mean, they were it was amazing. I've never seen it before, two fiddle players just with the two bows going the same. Right, Jimmy Power, Michael Gorman and Margaret Barry. Now you see, people say she's a lousy banjo player. No, she wasn't. She was wonderful. She got great lift. And it didn't matter that every now and then she'd miss the chord and get the wrong one, but really she just powered a band, just to lift you up. There we are. I'm not sure if there are any more photographs. Right, Joe Whelan, that's typical. That's the fellow here next to me is Tony Martin, the man who did the fiddles. He was a flute player from Belmullet, and Michael Gorman pushed him onto the fiddle. Lucy Farr and Joe Whelan. I think it's that could have been anywhere. That's just a party. Any more? I'm not sure if we've got any more photographs. Yeah, well, Tommy McCarthy and Raymond Roland in the White Hart in Fulham. What a great photograph that is. And a new tape for sale. I think that's lovely. And I'm not sure if I got any more. Is that it? Well, I'd like to thank all the musicians all these years who I've rubbed shoulders with, and I'd like to thank you all for coming along. And I'm just going to go off and paint the kitchen.
I really think, we owe such a debt of gratitude to Reg. I mean, I just feel as if I was in London. I mean, the windows are all blacked out here, and we may as well have been with them. I think the warmth that comes through, and the respect for the musicians and the people he met, but he has the heart of an archivist, which is really, really important. That all that he has taken in his life, the people of the experience, he's distilled it into the recordings that we have, the publications. And I really, really hope that everybody who takes these recordings home with them, who buys them, they're going to remember today and to be part of it, because it's going to be as much about remembering Reg talking about those recordings for me as it will be listening to the individuals. I think we've time, and I hope, if Reg doesn't mind, would anyone like to ask a question or make a comment? Just we have a wee bit of time here now, if anyone would like to say a few words.
Okay. I'd like to thank you very much. That was a fantastic, it was very stimulating talk altogether. When the musicians were playing, did people listen, or was there a lot of background talking and chatting?
Well, can I tell you a little story? I went to a concert in the Irish Centre, and there were 3 Donegal fiddle players on the stage. One was Danny Meehan, and somebody O'Byrne, and who's the famous Tommy Peoples? Is it? Yeah, Tommy Peoples, and it was fairly spontaneous, and they're playing separately and chatting away, you see. And the tables, people were sitting at tables, and there was this hush. There was a bar there, and they kept quietening the bar. And then these people were talking about Tesco's and how much the soap powder was and everything. And shh. And then the people on the stage said, could we have a little bit of quiet? And they all went quiet. And then, do you get that bus number 13? And you think, these people, what the hell are they talking about? There's great music going on. And these people that were sitting at this table, it was Danny Meehan's family. Because when people are in the cottage playing the music, you carry on the same as usual. The idea of, and I went to parish concerts, not being a Catholic myself, it was a great experience for me. And the nuns were in the front, and the priest was in the front, the old feet were going, and everyone's talking, and they're talking in stage whispers. Don't do that. They're talking in stage whispers, whatever was going on the stage, because it was the old style of being in the cottage. But they're not used to going to concerts. They're not used to it. Similarly, in the pubs. But yeah, people used to carry on talking, and ideally you've got a microphone, and Jimmy always played into a microphone if he could. But one of the things about the early pubs is that somebody would get up and sing, or be pushed up to sing, and they might be absolutely terrible singing, as Margaret Barry would say, in 23 different keys. And you'd get they're singing Come All Ye's, they were singing, the Cliffs of Dooneen or something, but they might be sort of rural Bing Crosby's or rural John McCormack's, or they couldn't hold a melody. They'd always get applause. Whenever they sang and finished singing, everybody in the pub would clap. You could have had Michael Gorman playing there. You could have had Michael Coleman playing there, playing his very best. Nobody would clap. They never clapped the instrumental music, they only clapped the singers. I think that's quite interesting. Yeah, they used to talk through it. Jimmy Power liked to play at folk clubs, which I didn't like, but I used to take and go to them, because he said everybody listens. Whereas in a pub, nobody listens. No, it's not true. Of course, loads were listening, but people carry on talking. Is that? That's
great.
Yeah. Yeah, go on.
Well, it's great to hear you again. I haven't seen you in 42 years.
Oh, well, you haven't changed.
This character on the Bowron,
Oh.
some people think it's you. I do remember him. I think he was from Limerick.
Yes, he was.
A very wild man.
Yes, he was.
But I never saw him dressed
Can
up
I tell you
before.
stories about him? He, that's Jerry Wright, who played the tambourine, although he called it the baron. He played the tambourine in the old-fashioned style, that way, you know, none of this getting tones and things out of it. And he had a cousin, a married couple, the Heffernans, and they're on the record, and that they played the old-fashioned Limerick, up the mountain sort of music. Now, he also was an amateur conjurer, and he'd come in as a favourite when it was all over, and everybody, and he'd say to some girl, you know, an American girl who was sitting on the front, "Have you got a handkerchief? Have you got a handkerchief?" And oh yes, and he'd put it in his hand like this, and "Have you got a match?" And someone else would give him a match, and he'd set light to the handkerchief, you see, and she, and of course then he'd open it up, and it was completely untouched, and all sorts of things with glasses and threepenny bits and things like that. But as he was getting the attention, he was just getting a little bit ruder, and sort of little innuendos, and that was his technique, and he was very funny, but he just gathered the people in. He had a talent. Now, he was he was another fellow who was a porter on the railway at King's Cross, and he got a little bit drunk one lunchtime, and he makes his way to the office and gets to the microphone, and I can't do his accent, but he said, the train standing on platform 13 is the stopping train to Limerick Junction. And he went through every stop from Dublin to Limerick, and he got the sack. But he was taken on again. I don't know if they do it over here, but funerals very often they have a big do the night before in the church, and the funeral in London can be quite small. I went to the do the night before in the church, and again, I'm not a Catholic, so it's all very foreign to me. It was absolutely packed. So that's a measure of your man, Jerry Wright. Don't leave it another 42 years. Anymore. Okay, then. What else do we do now?
Well, I think it's only...
I was just going to say, geez, that's great. Mighty altogether.
Mighty altogether. Now, there's only one thing. I want to explain the book, because no one has understood the title of the book, which is A Few Tunes of Good Music. And it was said to me by a rural musician, and it's just the idea of a tune of music that is so un-English to me. I don't know if it's natural to Irish people, but a tune of music. In England, the old people used to talk a band of music, but a tune of music. And it just hit me, but it hasn't apparently hit anybody else.
Okay, so folks, I really hope you've enjoyed as much as I have enjoyed this afternoon. And can we have one more round of applause for Reg Hall? And just to remind you that the CDs are available to buy here, and they'll be available at the Cobblestone. They're €18 each, or €30 if you'd like to buy both at great value. Can we also just let you know that Reg has been, so supportive in making material available to the archive, and one really nice thing has happened in the last year, and that we are acquiring Reg's 78 collection of Irish traditional music. So we've over 1,000 78s winging their way across from London, and they're going to be a permanent part of our collection, and we're in the process. They're going to be digitised and made available. So again, it's another fabulous contribution from someone who's been collecting, and that we think it's found its spiritual home here in Itma. So for anyone, please do come along to the Cobblestone tonight. I would say get there early, because there are a lot of people who want to come and want to, like us, pay homage to Reg as we're doing. So from there on, our next event here in this series of live events from ITMA, the last Thursday before Meltdown, and I can't remember the date, but we're going to have Donal Maguire, originally from Drogheda, now living in England, who's done great work on putting together a documentary called Chasing Michael Davitt, and it's the life of Michael Davitt through songs. It's now a documentary, and we're going to have a showing here. Unfortunately, we can't live broadcast this one, but if you're in Dublin, just on your way to Meltdown, come in and see it. Thursday, it'll be up online, and again, the tickets will be available through Eventbrite. So thank you all very much for coming, and we'll see you at the Cobblestone later on. Garmila, Michael.
One mark as well. You collected the wrong.